all leadership does not look the same.
That's good.
And so a lot of times we try to define leadership by personality traits. And listen, I don't care if you're a type A, type B, type C. Listen, personality does not mean you can have a type A personality, and I wouldn't allow you to lead me to Walmart, right? Leadership is not defined by personality traits, and a lot of times we choose leadership by charisma, by different things of this nature, but that is not leadership. I believe leaders are developed. I believe you can be born with the traits to be a great leader, but I believe leadership is a development journey. And you, on this journey, you develop into the best leader that you can be.
Welcome to the UnScripted Authentic Leadership Podcast, a podcast where we're seeking to lead change while also seeking to understand. We're also here as a platform for leaders to come together to unite, to develop, and empower other leaders in the areas of business, family, and community. I'm your host, Lafayette Lane, joined by my co-host, John LeBron, and tonight we have my pastor, the senior pastor of Greater Christ Temple here in Columbus, Ohio, Senior Pastor Wayne Moore Sr. here to have a conversation with us. He is a senior pastor, as I alluded to, I think, as not just one of the greatest churches in Columbus, but in the world of Greater Christ Temple. He is a leader par excellence and an innovative thinker. He's a thinker. And you'll hear that once we get into this conversation. Pastor, thanks for coming on tonight.
Oh, man. First of all, thank you both for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be on here. Lane, you're a blessing, man. John, you're a blessing. I thank both of you guys. I've watched from afar your podcast. I enjoy, number one, the mindset you both have and the drive you both have for excellence. And being on tonight, I'm honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to what we discuss on this evening.
Yes, sir. Let's get into it. Listen, Pastor, you are a pastor, which means you are set in a position of leadership. And of course, that's one of our main core values of this podcast and the fiber DNA of what we do. And I have a two-part question because pastoring involves leading people. And so my two-part question is, what has been one of the greatest challenges of leading people? And secondly, how have you overcome that challenge?
Okay, so wow, that's a very good question. I would say one of the biggest challenges of leading people is learning how to properly lead myself. And I think a lot of time when we look at leadership, we view are others following us. But the true question is probably, am I following my vision for who I am and the purpose for who I am? Because if I can't properly lead myself, then I'm already put in a position that's going to cause others to miss out. So I think for me, one of the difficulties or one of the challenges to being a good leader is learning learning who I am, and then realizing that all leadership does not look the same.
That's good.
And so a lot of times we try to define leadership by personality traits. And listen, I don't care if you're a type A, type B, type C. Personality does not mean you can have a type A personality, and I wouldn't allow you to lead me to Walmart, right? Leadership is not defined by personality traits, and a lot of times we choose leadership by charisma, by different things of this nature, but that is not leadership. I believe leaders are developed. I believe you can be born with the traits to be a great leader, but I believe leadership is a development journey. And you, on this journey, you develop into the best leader that you can be. And what was the second part there, Lane?
Well, you kind of answered it. The second part was, how have you overcome that challenge? And I think
Okay.
you answered it with the identity piece, knowing who you are.
Yes,
Great.
sir.
Go ahead, John.
So you said leaders are developed, and I 100% agree. But being in a church, especially as it grows, and you have to find and develop leaders within the church. Otherwise, it'll always be a small congregation dependent on just the senior pastor. So how do you identify and develop the leaders within the organization, because I think that is something that's applicable to any successful organization, even outside of the church.
Great question. So
Yeah.
I go back to what I said. I think realizing that, first of all, leadership is something that you see in people because you watch their daily actions, right? So you watch the fabric of what they do, right? And so for me, that is very important. It's one thing. Okay, so some people might be like, well, I would really like to do something. But if I've been watching your actions and you do absolutely nothing, uh, that's a stretch. That's a stretch.
Yeah.
But then if I'm watching your actions and I see the foundational pieces and structures of that, now we have something to build upon. Now I'm not saying that you don't take somebody who you see um, you see something there that you can build upon. You don't do anything, but I do think you look for traits, and one of the traits you look for is what is their level of consistency. What is their level of faithfulness to whatever they're doing? It doesn't matter what it is. Are they consistent? Are they faithful to it? Because here's what I know. The more weight that comes upon you in a leadership role, the true thing that's going to be tested is your level of consistency and faithfulness to it. Right? Everybody loves, the new shiny thing. But I want to know, are you going to be consistent to that thing 6 months down the line? And that's really what leadership is. I would say, if I would ask, if I would take a look at those who came before me who were my great leaders, I can say a lot of things about them. But I think one of the things that helped me grow the most was their level of consistency. They were always the same. Even when situations were different, they were the same. And I think you look for those traits in people, and you pick up those traits, and then you try to pour into people. And sometimes, it's hard to do that on a big scale. So you got to take time and pour into people individually. Right before COVID started, we had just went into leadership classes, and so I'm working on a format to get that back in, because at that point, this is the place I was at. I said, man, we have to develop leaders. We really have to take the time to develop leaders, and don't put a ministry name on it. No, leadership is the ministry name. We must develop leadership, because leaders give birth to more leaders, right? Whatever you want, you have to have, so it can, for lack of a better word, it can kind of begin to, by osmosis, grow itself. So if you don't have leaders, you got to grow them so then they can grow their own. So that for me is important. I think sometimes it can be difficult because you want to push people. Everybody doesn't like being pushed at the same. And so you see the leadership traits in some, and sometimes you got to step off the gas with some, put the gas on with others. But see it that you just now have to be very sensitive on how you help bring that out of them.
Man, that's a great response, and you said a lot of good things in that. But as you were talking about the leadership piece and developing leaders, my mind harkened back to one of the things that you told me. One of our very first conversations that I had with you, you said that leaders don't control people because you don't own them. You said that when you're leading people, and specifically in the context of the pastorship, they belong to God. And so, and we can apply, that's a principle that doesn't just apply in that context, but just in general. What would you say to the leader that feels like, if they don't feel like they're in control, or they don't have a certain sense of control, they don't feel like they're being a good leader? What would you say to the person that's like, I feel like I have to be in control of everything in order for me to be a good leader?
I would say there's a level of insecurity there. And I would probably say that's where that's coming from. Um, you usually, if we're not careful, especially in ministry, I believe it's very important in ministry to be fully validated by God. And what I mean by that is, God has called you. God has called you to a thing. And here's why that's so important. Because if you don't really have that inward validation from the call that is on your life, then you will minister, you will serve, but the serving will always be self-serving to meet a lack of validation that you didn't get from God. And what God does to the leader or the minister is he separates you from needing validated by the people he sends you to minister to. Right? So if I'm sending you to lead and minister to a certain people, you can't need to be validated by them at the same time, because you're going to change your message. Right? You're going to do different things so they'll applaud when maybe what I'm telling you to say in that moment isn't something that an applaud is what I have set in motion to come back. So what I would say is, in those moments, if you feel like, man, I got to be in control, I would say, spend time with God and let him fill a void, right? Let him fill a void. And so when he fills the void and you are not, you're not insecure in who you are, you won't feel like you have to control everything and so on and so forth. And the reality is, sometimes people are like that because it was right. Sometimes we make what we came up under. But I often think about validate you, and you know that God has validated you. You don't feel the need to do that.
Yep, that's good.
So since we're talking about validation, I have this come to mind sometimes. And as a pastor, same as a leader in a business, anybody who has a large sort of following and eyes are always on you, and maybe you're sort of a front runner or you're somebody who's speaking from a platform to somebody else. I know whenever I speak in front of a group, there's always that surge, that excitement, right? When they're really just drawing from you.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you had mentioned we have to really make sure our validation comes from God. How does a leader, and in your position, a pastor, how do you continue to be on a stage, leading from there, but not get into that sort of, routine where you're constantly looking for validation from the church, right? So your validation goes from just trying to get it from the church, being the funny pastor or the one that gets the applause or the amens or the whatevers, right? The hallelujahs, the arm raises, which makes you feel good. We would be lying if we weren't. But there's a small validation there. But how do we get to where we don't get so addicted to the validation from those following us and just keep it from the source?
Phenomenal question. Phenomenal question. Because you can get intoxicated. You can get drunk off of that feeling, right? And so I would say this: it is an everyday decision and choice to come before God and empty out your spirit before him so you can remain humble. One of the things that I pray, and I pray every Sunday especially, but anytime I'm about to go speak, I always say this: God bless the people, not because of me, but in spite of me. Because I never want to feel like I am the reason why something happened. And the less I think we can approach as leaders that we are partners in this, but this isn't about us, it kind of can help get rid of some of that puffed up feeling that you, if you're not careful, will run away with you. So you do have to monitor that. And anybody that tells you they don't, they're not being honest. You have to monitor that, because
100%.
if you don't, it will slowly take over. And here's what will happen. When you started out, you got your validation from God. But during the process, it switched from God to the people. And when it switches from God to the people, everything changes, including you.
There was a comedian, his name is Michael Jr. I don't know if y'all are familiar. And he used to travel and do comedy. He was in big churches a lot doing his routines, and he's so funny. And he said it all changed for him when he stopped trying to get laughs, meaning get validation. And he decided one day he was only going to give laughs, meaning serve them And that stuck with me. It was years and years ago when I heard him say that. I still follow him. He's so funny, but he uses it for ministry and so forth. Michael Jr., you should look him up. I think you really like him. But that was that same. I think it's a similar philosophy. Quit trying to get the laughs. Just start giving laughs to everybody. Now he's not so worried about whether they found the joke the funniest or if he delivered it perfectly, because it's not about him anymore. But anyways, go ahead, Lafayette.
No, that's good, bro. Pastor, one of the messages that you strongly emphasize a lot is this word environment. And to go along with that, you say, one of your sayings is, some things are caught, some things are taught. That you can teach somebody something, but there are some things that you're only going to receive by being in the right environment. Speak to that person that keeps saying that, well, if I only had a mentor, if I only was, if I had a sensei, if I had a teacher, but they're not putting themselves in the environment to even receive the download that they're looking for. How important is it to be in the right environment and to be in the right moment to catch what you need? Because some things are caught and some things are taught. How important is that?
Oh, I think it's so important. I think it's so important. I always go back to this because we usually gain our experience or our perspective on our experiences. And so my experience growing up, my father was very instrumental in my life. And he was a man who he had a funny way of delivering messages, but he was very distinct and very clear. He was a pastor, hard worker, just an awesome man. But I will always say this about him. I didn't know. See, here's the issue with not liking your environment is you don't know what you need, right? So you don't really know what you need. And so I'll say this, there were times I didn't like the environment, and there were some things my father was teaching, but at the same time I was catching stuff, right? I was catching how to move. I was catching what to do. The presence of being in the right environment will change you. There were times I was around my father, he didn't say one word, but I learned. There was times I would be around him, he didn't address me one time, but I learned because I was in the right place at the right time. I move on in life, he passes away. I find out after he's gone that the tools that are now in my belt, I didn't even realize I had them until he left. I didn't even realize that there was a transference to me because I was in the right place at the right time. And I was getting things that I would not have even signed up to receive. But later on, I found out I needed. And so here's what I would admonish anybody is to get in the presence of people who don't get in the presence of people who just tell you what you want to hear or tell you what you want. It's nice, but here it is. Get in the presence of somebody who you trust. And once there's a level of trust, then you can hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because you're going to need it all to become who you're supposed to be, right? So I would say get in the presence of somebody you trust. Get into the presence of somebody who is not where you're at, but is where you want to go.
Yeah.
But is where you want to go. And when you do that, you receive so much more. So I would say mentorship, environment, catching, teaching, all of it is important. But where you are at and where you spend your time, I believe is very important. I believe it is crucial.
That's good. John does a lot of parenting, especially for men. One of the things that you said regarding parenting, you said that as fathers, especially, we should be raising our children for us, them living with us in their absence, not us being in their present. And
Yes.
so preparing them for when we're off the scene, that they can still live on and move on.
A lot of times we condition our children for our presence, right?
Yeah.
And we never prepare them for our absence. So what you see a lot of times with children is you see them conditioned, right? They are conditioned on how to respond to your presence. But the moment you are gone, they don't know how to operate because you never prepared them for your absence. And here is one thing that really happens. One of the signs that they're maturing is that you pull back a little bit, right? You have to pull back because you have to create a space for them to now take what they have learned and now see if they can apply it. a quick story real quick. My father, he would do stuff like this. So I had a brother, and my brother was 4 years older than me. And so my father taught him how to tie a tie. And it came time for me to learn how to tie a tie. And I was waiting on my dad to say, come on, Wayne, let's. And my dad sent my brother. And my brother taught me how to tie a tie. And I was hot. Y'all, I was hot. I'm like, how you going to let him, how you going to teach him, Dad, but you don't teach me, right? And so I was just upset about this thing. I was probably 13 years old or so. And sure enough, my brother, Windsor, single Windsor, double Windsor, I learned how to tie a tie, right? I'm good. Years go down the road, and my father never told me, but once I thought about what he did, I realized what he was doing. My dad was the type of dad who would do this. If someone cannot teach what I have taught them, then I did not properly teach it. So not only was he teaching me how to tie a tie, but he was checking to see if my brother had properly learned what he taught him, because the sign that you learned it is you can now teach it, right? And so that's what I mean by providing space in an environment for you to now model what you've been taught.
Wow.
Wow, that is so good. I 100% agree. I tell people all the time in my coaching with dads that I don't actually raise kids, I raise adults.
Good. That's good.
Because the mindset there is 100% different. When you're raising kids, you're just trying to get them to not throw tantrums. When you raise adults, you're expecting them to do things that mature older children or young adults do. And that, I think, not that you should have too much expectations on them, but just holding that level of, I would say, standard, they will grab that and go with it. And so when someone says, wow, why is your son so mature around everybody else? I think, well, he's just how a normal 12-year-old should be in my eyes, right? I've just taught him to.
Yeah.
When I was doing youth group, one of the things I found out, I did a youth group when my son was like 2. I was the youth pastor at one of our churches, a youth leader. And I would take one of these retreats for the day. We'd come back. I'd say, where do y'all want to go eat? Taco Bell, Taco Bell. All right, let's go. So I take a dozen kids, 15 kids, whatever. We go into Taco Bell, and I say, all right, go ahead and order. And they would stand there and stare at me, most of them. I'm like, come on, order. Y'all first. And then they keep looking. I'm like, what's going on? They're like, we don't know how to do it. I'm like, what do you mean you're 12? They're like, you mean your mom has ordered your food your whole life and you're 12 now? I mean, you're literally 4 years from driving and you've never ordered a burger, a taco? They just gonna look at me. I'm like, do you know what you like? Well, yeah. Well, then tell him, And it seems simple, but literally, so after that moment, every chance I could, I would go through the drive-thru. I'd roll my son's window down and say, hey, order your food. And he's like 5 years old, right? And it's just because I didn't want the same results.
Yes, sir.
But don't we, isn't that the same principle in leadership in general? As you're raising leaders, shouldn't we be doing the same things? I mean, as we're raising leaders in the church, like, can you talk to the same responsibility to sort of, I think in the industry, we call it train the trainer sort of thing.
I mean, perfect example. You have to provide space for time on task. You have to provide space for people to I say to break some eggs, right? I mean, listen, you have to provide space, because everybody thinks they can do something watching it, but it's not until you do it that you're like, okay, all right, okay, I can't do it like that, but let me find my voice. Let me find how I move. Let me find what works for me. And so that's where I believe the space is needed. I believe oftentimes you have to you have to move people's personalities within inside of that, right? Because everybody is built different. You have one individual that's like, let me at him. I'm ready to go. Like, hey, I'll do it. Then you have another individual who's like, I don't know if I can. I don't know. And so, but both of them you can see the greatness on both of them. It's just one, their personality types are different. One is real, maybe can be a little bit closed off. The other one's more open, type A personality. And so even with that, you have to push them, right? You have to put them in environments where what's in them can come out of them. And I believe that I am an example of that. I believe I'm an example of a generation before me providing space for me to become, right? Providing space for me to become. And I think all leaders have a responsibility to provide that for those that are being developed and those that are really, I wouldn't say just next, but they're now at the same time.
Most of the demographic that listen or watch our podcast are men. We have a good percentage of women, but mostly it's men. And I know that you are very strong about men showing up and being who God has called them to be. That's one of the values that you push, not just in your message, but in the men of our church. And I want you to speak to that because I feel like there's an attack on men in society today to convince or not to be who God has called them to be.
Mm.
I don't want to say it in a way somebody will be offended, but that how important is it for men to really be men in our communities, in our homes, in the spaces of work, because we are really the foundation for our families and for the construct of how God really set it up. How important is that?
It's everything. It's everything. And listen, I love my wife. I love my mother. I would kill a rock over both of them. But if I'm going to be very honest with you, when men are out of place, everything is out of place.
Mm.
When men get in place, things that are out of order come back in order. That's the power of being a man. And then on top of that, walking in the purpose of a man. Listen, I think as men, one of the things, I know how God values men, but I believe society has devalued the power and presence of being a man.
Yeah.
So much to the point that where on Father's Day, you'll hear some women say, I'm the father. Listen, I'm sure you're doing a great job, but if you can say that, it is only because the value of how you see a man has been so diminished that you just think anybody can do it. There is such, and here's why I make that statement, because on Mother's Day, I don't hear very many men saying, "Where's my Mother's Day card?"
Yeah, go here.
And the reason why I believe men don't do it is because the majority of men have at least had their mother around and they honor who she was and what she did, right? And they don't want to take away from that by describing themselves as that because they have a level of honor for it. When the shoe is flipped, you have a lot of people in our society who don't even know who their father is. They haven't been raised by a father. So if I don't know who my father is, haven't been raised by one, then the title of what that means is devalued in my eyes. Then let's tie it to God. Now I got to come into a setting and you want me to call God Almighty Father. So watch this. I already have a negative connotation with that word Father because the only thing that has come through that for me has been disappointment, rejection. Come on. And so now we're in an environment where we're asking you to open up your heart to God. And when you hear that word Father, the only thing you have tied to it is somebody who wasn't present. And God said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. So now we're dealing with this disconnect between what a father is and what the society has deemed as fathers. I would say this to every man. If you are a man on this line, your purpose is so powerful that you yourself, if you will get in line with the purpose that is on your life, I promise you, everyone who is within your sphere of influence will be blessed. That's how powerful you are as a man. That anybody that is connected to you, if you are in your proper place, there will be no one who is connected to you that will not benefit exponentially from the power and the presence of you just being. That's who God has made us to be as men. We are leaders by nature. We're leaders by nature. Listen, I don't care if you just got one person following you. You're a leader by nature. It's in you to lead. It's in you to have dominion, right? It's in you to have dominion. And what I mean by that is to have a level of rule and governing not over everybody else, but over my own spirit. Come on,
Mm.
over the actions of who I am. And once I have dominion and I have a governing over myself, then God then gives me the ability to have an extension of that through my environment and the influences that I have. I will say this, and I truly mean this, man. I grew up in a home, and I was blessed, you all. I grew up in a home where we had a lot of women, but I grew up in a patriarchal home. My grandfathers, uncles, my father, and how they moved and how they talked. It created a presence. Now, here's another thing about being men. If we're gonna be honest, you got to be willing to have some responsibility on your shoulders.
Yep.
You have to be. You have to. If you're gonna be a man, listen. You got to be willing to deal with responsibility, being responsible. That is a prerequisite. Playtime is over, right? It is time to stand up. It is time to step up to the plate and say, okay, I now have to represent myself and a generation that is coming behind me. I want to challenge and celebrate every man that is watching this. I want to challenge you to become greater, because if you become greater, everybody attached to you becomes greater. And I want to celebrate who you are while you were formed in your mother's womb as becoming a male, that God gave you something unique and distinct for the earth that nobody else can do. In you being a man, you help set the temperature and the tone for the environment that God has placed you in.
Yep. Go ahead, y'all.
So, oh my goodness.
Yes, good.
To wrap that piece up, not to wrap it up, but to just add one, if you could add one piece to that, I have a question. So yes, men have to start stepping up, and we have a responsibility, not just to our families, to our communities, to our country, everything, to lead and to not just push off our responsibility onto someone else. And I think the large reason men are being devalued is because we're just allowing it to be taken, and therefore so the women in this world, who are also strong people, will say, fine, you won't do it, I'll do it. The reality is, it doesn't mean they all want to have to burden that, right? They would love to live in their purpose as well, not have to be mom and dad within a family. So question is, so like I have a men's leadership in exactly 1 month from today, right? If I was to say something to those men, or even a theme to that, what would be like, how do we start to change that conversation so men are taking responsibilities? Like how do you start leading in that direction so men will start answering the call to manhood?
Okay. So first I believe it has to be modeled. So the first thing I would say is the men who need to become that, who are they around that is modeling what they are being asked to become? Because one of the issues is a lot of our young men don't have a model in front of them on how to do it. If mom is at home doing the best she can, on her best day, she can never model to him how to be a man. So what he does is he grows up with this testosterone. He grows up bigger and taller than her, but he still doesn't have the blueprint on how to be a man. So he mimics what he thinks a man is, whether it be from what his friends are doing, what he sees on TV, and he now has this facade of what he thinks it is, but it's not. So the first thing I would say is you have to model it. It must be modeled. It must be modeled. Then I would also say a lot of times, and sometimes I don't want to come off. I want to come off like I'm insensitive. But I think we have to be willing as men to be all right with saying I don't know. I don't know, because as men we love passing the buck. You know, we love saying it ain't my fault. You know, it's her, it's him, it's them. There's no issues with me. So sometimes we have to learn how to say, you know what, that's on me, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get better. So I got to be humble in spirit. But I would say as long as something is being modeled in front of somebody, then the initiative is on them There's a door open. It's being modeled. Now there must be an initiative on me to say, okay, let me submit to that. Let me submit to what is being modeled. Let me submit to that. And it's hard for men to submit. It's hard for men. Let's just be real with it. It's
That's true.
hard for men to submit to anything. Um, that it, you know, when for men, we can be very confrontational. We can be very territorial. We can be a lot of things. So sometimes when we are learning things, we got to be willing to admit, I don't know. Right? I don't know. And sometimes in men, that's hard. But once a man is able to admit, I don't know, he can learn now. He can become better. He can develop. But sometimes as men, it is hard to admit, you know what? I don't know I don't know how to do this. And saying that does not mean you are not a man. Matter of fact, I would say saying that makes you more of a man because you are at the place where manhood is not defined by your level of perfection. Manhood is defined by your level of ability to see where you are and where are not, and then have the aptitude to go after it and become it.
John, did you have any more questions before we do our last segment? Pastor, we call our last segment the off-script moment, where we always ask our guests to leave the audience with one last thing that's on your heart. It could be anything that you just want to leave that last impression with the audience. Give us your off-script moment.
Okay, off-script moment. I would say in this moment of your life, where are you going? What are you reading? And who are you listening to? Where are you going? What are you reading? Who are you listening to? Take those three things and pay attention to them, because those will be the markers. Those will be the markers of where you will be in some years. Once you take a look at those and you don't like the direction that's pointed in, change it up. Change it up. Change it up. Because what you're reading, what you're listening to, and where you're going right now will have a very distinct impact on your future. And if those three things are not lining up with what God has said about you, then don't waste time in those places. I'll say this: God speaks to us to provide us with boundaries, and boundaries become the blueprint for who we're supposed to be. So as God is giving you who you are, pay attention to the boundaries in your life, because you're headed somewhere.
Come on, you headed somewhere. Listen, this has been an amazing conversation with Pastor Wayne Moore Sr. We want you to stay connected with him. You can do that several ways. Follow him at GCT_701. That's at GCT_701. Also follow his personal page at WayneMoore8075. Also, the website is GCT701.com. If you're wondering what the 701 is, GCT Greater Christ Temple is located at 701 Sunbury Road, right in the heart of Columbus, Ohio.
Yes.
Listen, God has graced us here. Stay connected to us here on UnScripted, at UnScripted on all social media platforms, unscripted-leadership.com. Our podcast is literally available on all streaming platforms, from Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio. You can find us. Just type in UnScripted Authentic Leadership Podcast. Leave us a rating, leave us a review. And pick up my new book. God has graced me to write a new book entitled I Was Pregnant Too: My Journey of Transformation and Fatherhood. Now, this book is not just for fathers, but it's for all of those that are pregnant with the seed of purpose. As Pastor talked about tonight, we all have something to offer, and we all have purpose inside of us. The question is, will you allow purpose to be birthed in your life? So go pick that up on Amazon. It also will be available on Barnes & Nobles in the next few days as well. So pick it up in those two different places. I Was Pregnant Too, and it is sure to bless your life. Again, thank you to my pastor, Pastor Wayne Moore, for having this amazing conversation with us tonight. We know that you will be blessed by this. As always, we pray that you be the leader that God has called you to be. We're here to build bridges and not walls. Bridges connect and walls divide. Until next time, God bless you.